Hello and a warm welcome to the latest edition of Property TV. In this special edition, we will be focusing on the future of the HMO sector in 2020. And today we'll be looking at licensing, population and the changing demographic patterns in the UK. So let's get started. So this was introduced back in 2004 as a way to combat rogue landlords by the government by introducing a mandatory licensing regime. In essence, nothing has really changed over the last 13 years. There are still rogue landlords out there. There are still rogue landlords renting out substandard accommodation to tenants who don't know any better. There are still rogue landlords effectively stealing money from people that shouldn't be in the game. And unfortunately, there are not enough council staff in order to combat this growing problem. What has happened, however, though, is the good landlords, the landlords who actually want to adhere to the regulations and want to be on the good side of the law, have effectively taken on more and more and more regulation. And whilst licensing is always meant to be cost neutral, there is a wide variety of fees across the UK, from the low 300s right up to nearly £2,000 in London for exactly the same work. There is mass interpretation across the board. We can go from one council to the next neighbouring council and find very different interpretations of the Housing Act, interpretations of the licensing and different viewpoints from the councillors themselves in terms of is licensing required or not in their particular area. So licensing has been around for some time now, but in essence all I've really seen it do is put more and more regulation into the sector. And with more and more regulation in the sector, this means only one thing: rents go up. Because if you have to pay another £2 or £3 or £4 or £5,000 to do something, then somewhere, someone has to pay for that. So the first place I'd start is the government right now is considering what to do with licensing overall. What I'd really like to see from the government is a clear, distinct plan and also interpretation of what that Housing Act means. I'd really like to see, in essence, a reduction in terms of that number of is it 4 or is it 5 or is it 6 people, and just be straightforward across the board and say, you know what, a HMO, once you have 4 more people in, needs licensing. What this will then do is remove all of these additional selective licensing schemes across the UK and mean that this is just one scheme that is applicable to everyone. So you know what you're doing, and this will apply to both private sector and also institutional investors, which will mean that they'll be a lot happy investing in the sector. The second thing I would also want to look at is actual training for council staff, because the interpretations vary across the board depending on who you talk to, depending on the level of seniority, depending on the council itself. And my feeling is that councils really need some help and training on this from a centralised source. Now, as to who would deliver this training, I'm not really sure who that would be, but it needs to be someone that really can bring together all of these different interpretations and issue clear guidelines that people can follow without what we have right now, which is very much an interpretation of what does this actual word mean versus someone having a different conversation in a different borough because they interpret the word differently. The third thing I would want to really focus on is a mandatory licensing scheme for agents and landlords, just generally, because I feel that if agents and landlords generally, and this includes estate agents and letting agents, have some kind of licensing where they have to be approved, they have to be accredited, they have to have gone through certain training, this again will mean the sector improves overall the image of the sector. It means that standards will go up, and it also means that more of the rogue landlords will be driven out, because the more that this comes through and the more people get to know that actually, are you a licensed landlord, where's your certificate, where's your membership, whatever that may be, then hopefully that will allow some of our overseas visitors, who are probably the people most at risk and the vulnerable people who don't know to ask those questions, to actually start asking those questions. Are you a registered landlord or a licensed landlord? And the last place I'd end is this one. Right now there's different standards for housing versus building regs versus planning versus conservation, and that's complete and utter crazy madness. What I would like to see is really a focus on creating a clear set of guidelines across the board for housing, planning, building regulations and conservations. So they all work in tandem with each other rather than right now effectively hitting heads, which is what they're doing at the moment. And really give that training to the council officials so they understand exactly what's going on and how to interpret that. The last place I'd end as well is let's reward good landlords. Let's get out there and really reward them and thank them for being there in the sector, continuing to invest in the sector and also improve standards, because there's not a lot of that going on right now. Demographic patterns continue to change and the people attracted to the HMO sector are always varied. Let's look at students. So this sector has grown rapidly and will continue to grow because of the release of caps from universities. With universities being able to effectively attract and recruit more students, this means that this market will continue to grow. Now, even with the competition from student block developers, and anybody looking to develop a student HMO portfolio should really look at what planning applications are in for student blocks. Even with that said and done, they will never have enough accommodation to really cater for the student demand. So the student demand, it's changing, it's growing, it's still there, and even with the impact of tuition fees, it's going to continue to grow. So the sector is healthy. Let's then look at key workers and migrant workers. This is probably where a lot of the uncertainty is right now. So in this sector, we'd include around 3 million people from Europe who are resident in the country, who would fit into this 21 to 40 age bracket, who potentially would be attracted to the HMO market. Now, with Brexit going on at the moment and that uncertainty about who is going to do those jobs, there's a lot of people feeling some aspect of fear and uncertainty. But I would say don't worry, because of several reasons. Firstly, British workers don't necessarily want the jobs that our European friends actually do. And secondly, even if tomorrow all European workers were asked to leave, I would predict that effectively those workers will be replaced from other countries, such as the Far East and India, where the government surely will be looking to create trade and migration patterns between those countries to effectively replace that working population, should that happen. I personally don't think it will, but that sector is really robust. It's a great sector to be in. So if you're in the key worker market, personally right now, I would just stick in it and continue doing what you're doing. Now finally, the professional market is probably the one that's changed the most. When I first started in the professional market 13, 14 years ago, the average age was probably between 22 to 26. The average salary was also significantly lower. What we see nowadays is the average salary has gone up quite a lot. Also, we're attracting people between the ages of 26 to 34, so much higher. And also we're seeing that people will stay longer. So 10, 15 years ago, they may be staying 8 to 10 months. Now they're staying 14, 16, 18 months, sometimes even 2 years. So that length of stay has increased significantly. And that's only good news for people in the professional sector. So here's a couple of recommendations or things to also look at just to wrap up this sector. The first one is, whilst Brexit's happening, let's open up dialogue with those other countries where potentially we have workers who may wish to come to the UK. So I'm talking about former Commonwealth countries. I'm talking about the Far East, Australasia, Canada, North America, even South America, and let's start working with those people to bring them in right now. The last solution is this, and really this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do think it's overdue, is that we really need to start training people in schools how basic tasks in a house work. So how does a stopcock work? How do you turn the water off? What is an electric fuse box, and what happens when maybe the kettle fuses the house? You don't have to necessarily call the agent. You can go and find out for yourself, has the fuse tripped, and if so, click on the fuse. These little tasks like this would save hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours of time from people that really haven't had that education to understand how to live in a HMO. So that's all from this week's episode of Property TV. We do hope that you'll be back next week, where we're going to be straight back on with the news. And please, if you have any comments, suggestions or questions that you want to ask us, please send them in and we'll be sure to cover them in another edition of Property TV. I'll see you soon.